Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for giving me some of your time. Tonight we're going to depart somewhat from our customary format. We're starting off by stating that a powerful conspiracy exists, and we want to tell you some of its history, its method of operation, and some of the harmful successes it has already achieved. Ultimately, of course, our goal is to stimulate you to want to help us to expose it, for exposure is what is needed to counter the works of darkness. It is for this purpose that a great deal of evidence about the existence of a currently operating conspiracy for world rule has been assembled in this special conspiracy issue of the New American Magazine. We begin with a definition of conspiracy. A conspiracy is an endeavor engaged in secretly by two or more persons for the accomplishment of an evil goal. Every conspiracy, therefore, has three elements: secrecy, more than one person, and evil. Though we live at a time when the very word conspiracy sets people to rolling their eyes or shrugging their shoulders, conspiracies have existed all throughout the course of history. Anyone who wants to discount their presence has to rewrite history. Even in Holy Scripture, we find St. Paul's urging to the Romans, "The night is past and the day is at hand. Let us therefore cast off the works of darkness and put on the armor of light." He also told the people of Ephesus, "And have no fellowship with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather reprove them." A major goal of the John Birch Society is to put on the armor of light and reprove the works of darkness. The year 1776 was momentous for several reasons. One event in that year was the publication of Adam Smith's prodigious economic treatise, Wealth of Nations. But 1776 also saw two even more important events: the creation of our nation and the launching of a conspiracy whose goal was to destroy religion, nationhood, and virtually every other institution built to better mankind's existence. The birth of the United States with the Declaration of Independence on July 4, 1776 is well known. But the creation of an Illuminati conspiracy in Bavaria on May 1st of 1776 is largely unknown. The latter, as we shall show, is the complete antithesis of the former. America was built on godly principles. Our founding fathers held that men are endowed by a creator, not by government, with certain unalienable rights, and that the purpose of government is to secure those rights. Government was not to redistribute the wealth, take control of people's lives, or dominate their existence and make them slaves. No. The men who founded this nation believed in what they called self-evident truths, and one of those is that the purpose of government is to safeguard rights to property, speech, assembly, religion, and so much else that Americans take for granted. Government shall not interfere with basic God-given rights, said this nation's founders. But the Illuminati conspiracy sought to destroy all governments and all existing institutions, especially religions, in order to construct on the ashes of what they would destroy a new world order, a novus ordo seclorum. This conspiracy was to be led by a very few at the hidden core of a diabolically driven organization. Conceived by a university professor named Adam Weishaupt, the Illuminati meant to establish a tight rule over mankind with an all-powerful world government. What Weishaupt sought is precisely what stares us in the face today. At the very outset of our survey of some largely hidden but very important history, let us openly assert that there is operating in the world today, and especially within our own nation, a conspiracy that is either a direct descendant of the Illuminati of 1776 or something closely patterned after it. History should be studied to keep from repeating it, to keep from being victimized by what is known to have happened before. Certainly, part of the history we should examine includes the Illuminati of Adam Weishaupt. The John Birch Society was launched in 1958. Long before 1958, however, many others spoke out about this conspiratorial organization. For instance, a lengthy editorial appeared in the Boston-based Christian Science Monitor in June of 1920. Commenting on some remarkably disturbing events of its day, the editorial made reference to an exceptional book exposing the Illuminati written in 1798 by an Englishman named John Robeson. The 1920 editorial stated, "What is important to dwell upon is the increasing evidence of a secret conspiracy throughout the world for the destruction of organized government and the letting loose of evil. Anybody who will turn for a moment to the outpourings of Adam Weishaupt and the Illuminati may satisfy himself of that." John Robeson, who studied the gyrations of this order in France and Germany, has summed up its ideals as the obliteration of Christianity, the deification of sensuality, the proscription of property, the abjuration of all religion and morality, the repudiation of marriage, and as a necessary corollary, the state adoption of children, universal license, and the wrecking of civilization and giving over of society to a general plunder. The Monitor editorialist claimed that the Illuminati's program included political degeneracy, manipulation of the people's thinking, even the propagation of evil for the sake of evil. To those who might scoff at such a notion, the writer stated in 1920, when his work appeared, that the existence of, quote, "the conspiracy of evil against humanity is entirely undeniable," end quote. It is no less deniable as the 20th century winds to a close. The goals of this conspiracy noted in the 1920 editorial are being realized today. Our Christian-style civilization is being obliterated. Sensuality is being deified in books, magazines, movies, and television. Property rights are being eroded. Religion and morality are under attack. Marriage is being denigrated. And numerous government programs have been instituted to gain control of children. In addition, the threat of a world government being built on the ashes of all of this destructiveness is very real. More commentaries such as this exist. In February 1920, Winston Churchill wrote an article for London's Illustrated Sunday Herald. While we do not accept all of his assertions in this article, Churchill gave evidence of having a solid understanding of the Illuminati when he referred to Adam Weishaupt as Spartacus. As John Robeson and others have pointed out, members of the inner core of the Illuminati chose code names for themselves. Weishaupt's choice was Spartacus, the name of the leader of a slave revolt that kept ancient Rome in terror for 3 years. Here is what Churchill wrote in 1920. From the days of Spartacus Weishaupt to those of Karl Marx and down to Trotsky, Russia, Béla Kun, Hungary, Rosa Luxemburg, Germany, and Emma Goldman, the United States, this worldwide conspiracy for the overthrow of civilization and for the reconstitution of society on the basis of arrested development, of envious malevolence, of impossible equality, has been steadily growing. It has been the mainspring of every subversive movement during the 19th century, and now at last this band of extraordinary personalities from the underworld of the great cities of Europe and America have gripped the Russian people. Note that Churchill linked the 18th century Illuminati to Karl Marx of the mid-19th century, and then to such 19th and 20th century revolutionaries as Russia's Leon Trotsky, Hungary's Béla Kun, Poland and Germany's Rosa Luxemburg, and America's Emma Goldman. As he indicated in 1920, the conspiracy involving all of these individuals has been steadily growing. Then in 1953, a California Senate Committee on Education also linked the Illuminati to the scourge of communism. Its conclusions, appearing in what became known as the Dilworth Report, stated, "So-called modern communism is apparently the same hypocritical and deadly world conspiracy to destroy civilization that was founded by the secret order of the Illuminati in Bavaria on May 1st, 1776, and that raised its hoary head in our colonies at critical periods before the adoption of our federal Constitution." We highlight these commentaries to demonstrate that even though most don't know it, everyone alive today, and especially Americans, are threatened by a core of individuals who are determined to achieve total control of mankind. This particular plot continues its deadly assault on the human race. We who live in the United States, therefore, have a very important choice to make. Do we retain and restore the marvelous but greatly eroded American system given us by far-seeing men in 1776? Or do we allow an evil conspiracy formed in 1776 to reach its final goal and take all of mankind into its hellish New World Order? The destination towards which Americans are being taken is not what the people of this nation want. If they can be brought to understand that a conspiracy is tightening its grip, most will take action to expose it, thereby defeating it. This is why we have put these thoughts together. We want Americans informed, because when they are informed, we have no doubt that they will choose the American way. Let us now review some deliberately hidden history. Adam Weishaupt was a brilliant organizer. The 18th century in which he lived had already suffered from the ravages of numerous secret societies. In 1776, Weishaupt created the most formidable of all of them, calling it the Order of the Illuminati, the Enlightened Ones. Built on a system of concentric circles of power, influence, and knowledge of the conspiracy's ultimate goal, he set out to recruit utopian idealists and ambitious schemers into his sect. From these, he selected the most able and cunning and moved them into higher circles of power and knowledge of the Order's long-range plans. His organizational genius enabled him to harness the energies of individuals at every level of his brilliantly conceived structure. The final end of the Illuminati was to rule the world. In order to accomplish this enormous undertaking, Weishaupt set out to destroy all existing institutions. His plan called for overthrowing governments, destroying religion, abolishing private property, replacing morality with sensuality and license, and eventually merging all of mankind under one centrally controlled world government. Recruiting for the Illuminati was to be accomplished by first gathering neophytes into the outer circles, where they would be persuaded that the general object of the endeavor they were joining was the happiness of mankind. The resulting activity of Weishaupt's neophytes parallels the labor of today's liberals. Both were energized to tear down the basis of a healthy society in the mistaken belief that their efforts would benefit their fellow man. Talented, energetic, and ambitious neophytes were noticed and quickly selected for advancement into the next higher circle, where they were referred to as Minervals. Soon, promising Minervals would be told that religion was mere superstition and patriotism narrow-mindedness. Then they were introduced to sensual pleasures and corrupted morally to the degree that abandoning the order became extremely unlikely. If the sensual pleasures weren't lure enough, the thought that their involvement in such practices could be publicized froze them in place. The glorification of sensuality and downgrading of morality had a profound effect on these individuals. The rank of Illuminatus Minor was next conferred on those deemed worthy of additional advancement. The elevated recruits were ordered to spy on others in their respective ranks and to report their findings to a superior. All who did so knew full well that someone was reporting on them. All the while, any means to achieve the ends of the order were deemed acceptable, and the conspirators spent great energy recruiting into the various levels of their conspiracy the sons of the very powerful and very wealthy. The next level of conspiratorial acceptance saw the rank of Illuminatus Major conferred on highly regarded candidates. Beyond these levels of conspiratorial advancement remained the ranks of Presbyter, Prince, Magus, and Rex. Fewer and fewer conspirators were welcomed into each higher level. As the Illuminatus Rex, Weishaupt was known only to the highest initiates. He stated, "My circumstances necessitate that I should remain hidden from most of the members as long as I shall live. I am obliged to do everything through 5 or 6 persons. I have 2 immediately below me into whom I breathe my whole spirit, and each of these 2 has again 2 others, and so on. In this way I can set 1,000 men in motion and on fire in the simplest manner, and in this way one must impart orders." Members of the innermost circles were asked to swear an oath which included the following passage: "I bind myself to perpetual silence and unshaken loyalty and submission to the order in the persons of my superiors, here making a faithful and complete surrender of my private judgment, my own will, and every narrow-minded employment of my power and influence." Once into the conspiracy at this level, it was extremely difficult either to retreat or leave altogether. The oath also included a pledge to conduct oneself according to the wishes of the order or submit to, quote, "whatever punishment my superiors shall enjoin," end quote. An illuminist calling himself Brutus stated in a letter to Weishaupt, the order must possess the power of life or death in consequence of our oath. And another Illuminatus named Diomedes remarked that death, inevitable death, from which no potentate could protect them, awaited every traitor of the order. It was all quite diabolical. Adam Weishaupt, who organized all of this, was born in 1748 in Ingolstadt, Bavaria. He was educated by the Jesuits at the University of Ingolstadt, where in 1772 he became the first layman to hold a chair in canon law. His sizable ego brought him problems with the university's authorities. When his resistance to their leadership became fruitless, he turned to Masonry for support for his ways. Before he formed the Illuminati, however, he received no support from them. Already conversant with other secret societies, he formed the Illuminati on May 1st, 1776. This is the date, of course, that has been selected by communists and socialists the world over to celebrate their respective movements. Most of them believe its significance has something to do with a commemoration of Marxism. Hardly any know that May 1st coincides with the founding of Weishaupt's conspiracy in 1776. In 1777, Weishaupt affiliated with the Masonic Lodge in order to take control of it for his purposes. By 1782, at the Masonic Congress held at Wilhelmsbad in Germany, Weishaupt's corps of brilliant conspirators succeeded in taking over French and other continental European Grand Orient lodges. Illuminized Masonry spread like wildfire throughout Germany, Sweden, Russia, Poland, Denmark, Hungary, Austria, and France. In 1784, while traveling in Bavaria, a courier for the Illuminati was struck by lightning and killed. When local authorities found the man's body, they also found documents gravely incriminating the order. Further information about the odious deeds and plans of the Illuminati were gleaned from a 1786 raid on the home of a high-ranking Illuminatus named Zwack. Because of what they had learned of Weishaupt's creation, the Bavarian authorities decreed that recruiting for the Illuminati would henceforth be prohibited under penalty of death. Weishaupt fled north to Gotha, where he ostensibly gave up Illuminism and became reconciled to the Catholic Church. His reconciliation was a ruse, however, and the piety and seeming abandonment of the goals of the order he exhibited only made him more dangerous. During the 1780s, Illuminists in France began plotting a revolution in order to destroy existing stability in that nation. By 1786, Mirabeau, Danton, Marat, Robespierre, Talleyrand, Lafayette, and others set out to overthrow thrones and altars, the monarchy and the church. Such a plan was to be repeated worldwide. Mirabeau organized the Club Breton, which became the Club des Jacobins, the center of Illuminism and Illuminized Freemasonry. And Voltaire, one of the great minds of history who recognized that ideas rule the world and who used his considerable talents for the evil goals of the conspiracy, started a club for propaganda. It became the conspiracy's medium for mass indoctrination in France. When all was ready for revolution, some pretext was needed to get mobs into the streets of Paris. Word was passed to the people that weapons stored at the Bastille prison could be found and used to protect the monarchy from a rumored insurrection supposedly already underway elsewhere in the city. About 1,000 Parisians marched to the soon-to-be famous prison, many believing that they would find large numbers of skeletons, even prisoners chained in the darkest of dungeons. But what really happened, according to Jean-Paul Marat, one of the conspirators, is as far from the accounts given in most history books as could be imagined. Marat wrote, "The mob found a mere 7 inmates living quite comfortably. 4 were forgers, 2 were lunatics who had been mad before they were imprisoned, and 1 was a count who had been jailed for monstrous crimes at the request of his family. In the confusion caused by the mob, the 4 forgers simply melted into the crowd and disappeared. The 2 lunatics were found and placed in a different asylum, and the count was returned to his disappointed relatives. The mob found no captives in chains, no skeletons, no corpses, and none of the horrors it had been led to expect. But during the attack on the Bastille, the prison guards were butchered, along with some of the brave individuals who tried desperately to stop the rioting. This is only a brief glimpse of what actually transpired during the storming of the Bastille, yet the event has been memorialized as a great victory of the people who supposedly rose up against their masters in search of liberté, égalité, and fraternité. Its date, July 14th, continues to this day as a great national holiday in France. A few comments are in order about these three revolutionary goals. Liberty is one thing and license is another. The liberty sought by the revolution was a release from all restraint, especially any moral and religious restraint. The slaughter that followed this cry of liberty typified the casting off of religiously inspired morality. Equality is a plea frequently heard in our time. There is one certain place to find it, however, in prison. The cliché holds correctly that free men are not equal and equal men are not free. None of us is the equal of others in talent, strength, wealth, looks, etc. What should be sought is equality under just law. Everyone, whether a humble citizen or a prominent and wealthy individual, should be treated equally under the law. But the intent of those who raised the cry of equality in France was to incite mobs to plunder the property of others. And fraternity or brotherhood is another nice sounding goal. But is it the brotherhood of man under the fatherhood of God, or is it the brotherhood of man under some other spiritual force? Cries of liberté, égalité, fraternité, whether in French or any other language, can indeed be revolutionary, and they can constitute a very dangerous invitation to evil. The siege of the Bastille inaugurated the monstrous French Revolution, which eventually claimed the lives of King Louis, his queen, Marie Antoinette, and 300,000 peasants who were supposed to be the beneficiaries of the uprising. The revolutionaries displayed some of their ultimate intentions by seizing Notre Dame Cathedral and placing a prostitute on the high altar where she was worshipped as the goddess of reason. The blood stopped flowing in France only when Napoleon became the nation's dictator. It is sadly true but perfectly accurate to state that France has never recovered from the French Revolution. Were there justifiable causes for revolution in 1789 France? The answer is absolutely none, except for conspiratorial design. France was at peace. The French people were in good health. There was a growing population, and there was general prosperity, minimal government intrusion into the lives of the average citizen, and a revered monarchy led by Louis XVI. But history shows that determined revolutionaries can and do employ diabolical planning, massive deceit, and gullible people to stimulate crimes of every variety on their way to anarchy as a stepping stone to absolute power. As outrage upon outrage was visited on the French people by the revolutionaries, each of their crimes was cited as reason for greater and more horrible turmoil. What we have stated, of course, is quite the opposite of the view given by Charles Dickens in his A Tale of Two Cities. Dickens would have readers believe that abused peasants in France rose up to overthrow evil masters. A Tale of Two Cities does not accurately reflect the period it depicts. A good historical novel would be true to that history. News of the French Revolution was greeted by some in America with great joy. It was felt that the uprising in France was a duplication of the strife which led to our nation's independence. But a well-informed John Adams received the news with great misgivings. He believed of France that, quote, adherence to the revolutionary government would lead to great and lasting calamities, end quote. Attempts were made by French leaders to enlist the support of President Washington in converting our nation's independence into a copy of France's convulsion, and later to have the United States take the side of France in her war with Spain. Washington resisted. When Lafayette sent the president the key to the Bastille, Washington accepted it and hung it in the presidential mansion right next to a portrait of Louis XVI. In other words, yes, I will accept your gift, but I will not accept your revolution. Soon the Democratic clubs, patterned after the Jacobin clubs in Paris, sprang up here in America. French flags were found flying over the courthouse in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania during the 1794 Whiskey Rebellion. President Washington saw that uprising for what it truly was and stated, quote, "This is the first formidable fruit of the democratic society's diabolical attempts to destroy the government," end quote. As he assessed the developing situation, John Jay, our nation's first Chief Justice, added, quote, "The Jacobins are still more numerous, more desperate, and more active in this country than is generally supposed," end quote. With excellent leaders, our infant nation survived the onslaught of revolution that gripped France, but its partisans and their designs would reappear again and again. In 1798, two important books about the Illuminati and its destructiveness were published in Europe. The first, referred to in the 1920 Christian Science Monitor editorial we have already discussed, is Proofs of a Conspiracy, written by Professor John Robeson. The second, a more detailed 4-volume study entitled Memoirs Illustrating the History of Jacobinism, was written by a French priest named Augustin Baruel. Much of the information we are presenting comes from these two works and others mentioned in this program. Though they worked independently, these two authors were in substantial agreement about the threat to civilization posed by Weishaupt's Illuminati and about the Illuminati's pivotal role in fomenting and carrying out the French Revolution. Robeson's book was promptly brought to America, and Reverend G.W. Snyder of Frederickstown, Maryland, sent a copy to George Washington. During this period, some Illuminist and Grand Orient lodges of Freemasonry had already been established in America. The Blue Lodge and Scottish Rite Freemasonry here in America, however, did not come under the influence of these plotters. After he read John Robeson's book, Washington thanked Reverend Snyder in a letter dated October 24th, 1798. It stated in part, "Reverend Sir, it was not my intention to doubt that the doctrine of the Illuminati had not spread in the United States. On the contrary, no one is more satisfied of this fact than I am." Later, Washington received the text of a sermon given on Thanksgiving Day in 1798 by Reverend Jedediah Morse, the father of telegraph inventor Samuel F.B. Morse. Reverend Morse was perhaps the most intense of several prominent Americans who were anxiously warning fellow citizens about the penetration of our nation by the Illuminati. In an appendix to his letter, Reverend Morse condemned the secret disorganizing clubs started in this nation by a French emissary named Genet, who had been sent here for the purpose of gaining control of the United States for the revolutionary French government. Reverend Morse correctly stated of these clubs that they had a parent society in Bavaria, the Illuminati. Washington responded to Reverend Morse in a February 28, 1799 letter shown here. The now former president thanked him for the transcript of his Thanksgiving sermon and especially for its appendix referring to the Illuminati. The letter with which you were pleased to favor me, dated the 1st instant, accompanying your Thanksgiving sermon, came duly to hand. For the latter, I pray you to accept my thanks. I have read it and the appendix with pleasure, and wish that the latter, at least, could meet a more general circulation than it probably will have, for it contains important information as little known out of a small circle as the dissemination of it would be useful if spread through the community. By the early 1800s, both in Europe and in America, the Illuminati retreated and went more deeply underground. But Yale University President Timothy Dwight had warned of the Illuminati's presence in 1799. And in 1920, Professor Vernon Stouffer of Ohio's Hiram College supplied many details about the Illuminati's threat to America prior to 1800 in his book, New England and the Bavarian Illuminati. Numerous modern historians insist that the Illuminati, having been exposed and challenged, completely disappeared. But there is strong evidence that the Italian Carbonari continued to advance the plot in Italy. Formed around 1810 in the city of Abruzzi, the Carbonari derived its name from the practice of charcoal burning in that Italian city. Meeting in the marketplace, its basic unit became known as the vendita, the word whose root gives us the English word vendor. The highest lodge of the Carbonari, known as the Alta Vendita, stated its goal in 1818. Our final aim is that of Voltaire and the French Revolution, the destruction forever of Catholicism and even the Christian idea, which, if left standing on the ruins of Rome, would be the resuscitation of Christianity later on. The work which we have undertaken is not the work of a day, nor of a month, nor of a year. It may last many years, a century perhaps, but in our ranks the soldier dies and the fight continues. In 1827, a young firebrand named Giuseppe Mazzini was welcomed into the Carbonari. Only 22 years old at the time, he eventually parted with the Carbonari and rose to an even higher place in the overall conspiracy. He formed the group known as Young Italy, which later merged with the Carbonari. In time, other nations had the misfortune of having similar groups formed within their borders. Young Poland, Young Germany, Young France, Young England, Young Ireland, and Young America. Mazzini went to London, where he teamed up with Karl Marx and then helped to foment a revolution in Italy in 1848, the year when revolution ravaged most of the nations of Europe. And France's Louis Napoleon, eventually achieving power in 1852 as Emperor Napoleon III, was so heavily involved with the Carbonari that he was actually known as Carbonaro. Much was eventually learned about the Carbonari and its Alta Vendita through publication of a book authored by Monsignor George Dillon, a Catholic priest in Scotland. An intense student of the entire conspiracy, he was ordered by church authorities to assemble his lectures about the subject into a book. Published in 1885 as The War of Antichrist with the Church, the book spread his startling information far more widely. Monsignor Dillon supplied some important details about Weishaupt's retention of control of the diabolical plot after relocating to Gotha. Weishaupt, after being deprived of his professorship in Bavaria, found an asylum with the Prince of Coburg-Gotha, where he remained in honor, affluence, and security until his death in 1830. He continued all of his life the chief of the Illuminati, and this fact may account, in large measure, for the fidelity with which the Illuminati of the Revolution, the Directory, the Consulate, the Empire, the Restoration, and the Revolution of 1830 invariably carried out his program of perpetual conspiracy for the ends he had in view. It may also account for the strange vitality of the spirit of the Illuminati in Italy, Switzerland, Germany, and Spain, and of its continuance to our own day. Monsignor Dillon claimed that the Alta Vendita of the Carbonari was, quote, the immediate successor of the inner circle of Weishaupt, end quote. He further claimed that the first leader of this Italian creation was a corrupt nobleman who took the name of Nubius and died mysteriously in 1837. Perhaps the most dramatically relevant portion of this important work is its publication of the detailed plans of the Alta Vendita conspirators to send their people into the Catholic Church. By doing so, they expected to gain influence over the Catholic people and to neutralize the Church from within. The permanent instructions of the Alta Vendita to its members contained the following passage. Let the clergy march under your banner in the belief always that they march under the banner of the apostolic keys. Lay your nets like Simon Bar-Jonah. Lay them in the depths of the sacristies, seminaries, and convents rather than in the depths of the sea. A leader of the Carbonari, who used the name Piccolo Tigre, added his own instructions to those already given. He wrote, the conspiracy against the Roman See should not confound itself with other projects. It is of absolute necessity to decatholicize the world. Let us not conspire except against Rome. We now come to another important element in the conspiracy's continuation, the creation and rise of communism attributed to Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. Marx was born in 1818 to a middle-class German family. He went to the University of Bonn, where he distinguished himself by being expelled for drunkenness. He would have been right at home in many American universities. He moved to England, where the Industrial Revolution had lured many citizens from the rural areas into the cities. because there were more job seekers than jobs, conspirators exploited the ensuing unrest. Marx teamed up with another aspiring revolutionary named Engels, and the two became deeply involved in subverting the existing order. Spouting the revolutionary ideas of Voltaire and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the two philosophical heroes of the French Revolution, they developed a reputation as willing servants of conspiratorial planners. Marx and Engels eventually affiliated with the German branch of the League of the Just, a nice-sounding name for a group that later changed its name to the Communist League. Rooted in secrecy and subversion, the League of the Just, which had established branches in most European nations, set out to unite the continent's various socialist factions under a common manifesto. Its members sought to spread the plague of socialism and communism throughout Europe. Their goals coincided completely with those of the Illuminati, and it is believed by some historians that the League of the Just was an outgrowth of the Illuminati of 1776. The task of writing the desired unifying document for Europe's socialists fell to Marx and Engels. Unabashed plagiarists, they took the work of another socialist named Blanc and used it as a basis for their own creation, the Communist Manifesto. It is noteworthy that the manifesto's first edition didn't even carry the names of Marx and Engels. Actually, they were relatively minor players in a much larger and more sinister production. Here is a copy of the title page of the manifesto's first edition, which mentioned neither of its authors. It was later decided by the conspiratorial elite, in keeping with a practice both before and after Marx, to glorify him as one of history's great thinkers. He was instead one of its great haters. Our John Birch Society edition of the Communist Manifesto carries an additional preface written by Engels in 1888, the 40th anniversary of the document. In it, Engels stated that he and Marx had thought at first to label the document the Socialist Manifesto, but didn't do so for two reasons. One, there were quacks running around calling themselves socialists with whom they didn't want to associate. And two, socialism was perceived as a middle-class movement seeking slow change, and they preferred that their style of revolution be perceived as coming from the working class. Nevertheless, the manifesto has always been claimed by both socialists and communists as theirs. It certainly qualifies as an extension of the diabolical plans of Weishaupt's creation in 1776. Both Marx and Engels are precisely the type of individuals the Illuminati sought to use and then perhaps welcome into one of its inner circles at a later date. What Marx and Engels gave the world in 1848 amounted to replacing God with reason and religion with the worship of nature. A close study of what Marx produced shows that in addition to being the father of communist-style socialism, he is also a progenitor of the extreme environmentalism that makes Earth a god while attacking the very concept of private property. The text of the manifesto boldly states, "The theory of the communists can be summed up in the single sentence, abolition of private property." In succeeding pages, the document seeks abolition of the family, ending what it scoffingly refers to as the hallowed correlation of parent and child, replacing homeschooling in favor of state-run education, abolishing the institution of marriage, eradicating countries and nationalities, and terminating all religion and religious-based morality. All of these goals of Marx are being implemented in our nation and elsewhere. The manifesto then lists its famous 10 planks, all of which have been partially or completely fashioned on our nation in the 20th century. To take total control of a nation, Marx called for land controls, a graduated income tax, abolition of the rights of inheritance, centralization of credit and banking, which has been accomplished via the Federal Reserve, even supposedly free education in government-run schools. It ought to be obvious to anyone that our nation is being made over into a Marxist state. Americans who have been persuaded to favor the various elements of Karl Marx's program aren't necessarily determined communists or socialists, but they have been infected with communist and socialist thinking, oftentimes without even realizing it. And though only a few of our legislators and government officials have ever been communist or socialist conspirators, many are the go-along to get-along types who will do anything to retain their exalted positions. A conspiracy counts on using the energies and talents of such individuals. This is how a conspiracy can accomplish its goals with so few actual conspirators. The revolutionary program compiled by Marx and Engels soon infected most of Europe, and our nation was certainly not spared. The conspiracy that had spawned communism and socialism also gave rise to nihilism, anarchism, syndicalism, and other isms, all of which ultimately lead to power over all in the hands of a very few. As in other countries, groups advocating socialism, communism, nihilism, and anarchy were formed here in America. Following the lead of the Illuminati, many sought to tear down the existing order prior to seizing power. In 1886, a remarkable and horrifying incident occurred at the famous Haymarket Square in Chicago. Revolutionaries had made a practice of congregating in the square to recruit and to preach their poison to the crowds. The authorities knew that some of these characters were dangerous, so there were always plenty of police officers on hand. On a particular day in 1886, revolutionaries took stations at the outer edge of the crowd, and on a given signal, they opened fire on and hurled hidden bombs at the police. 7 policemen were killed and 68 were injured, some so seriously that they were never able to work again. Captain Michael Shack of the Chicago Police Force investigated the incident and spent the next 3 years learning what had really transpired. In 1889, his monumental book, Anarchy and Anarchists, concluded that the incident was a step in a carefully orchestrated worldwide plan. He wrote, "In London, there are all the factors for the most dangerous mob the world can produce. In France, the Commune is stronger than ever it was, and the Red Terror may appear with every turn of the whirligig of politics. In Spain and Italy, the socialists are busy, while in Germany and in Russia, a crisis is at hand. Let none mistake either the purpose or the devotion of these fanatics, nor their growing strength. This is a methodic, not a haphazard conspiracy. The ferment in Russia is controlled by the same heads and the same hands as the activity in Chicago. There is a cold-blooded, calculating purpose behind this revolt, manipulating every part of it the world over to a common and ruinous end." Yes, indeed, a methodic, not haphazard conspiracy leading to a common and ruinous end. Captain Shack's book is important testimony about the existence of a worldwide conspiracy, even here in America, for the establishment of total power. The conspiracy didn't die when Weishaupt went to meet his maker, nor did it die when Marx passed away. And it has not faded away during our times. Rather, it is terribly more powerful and well-entrenched as its top leaders move closer and closer to the realization of their dreadful goals. Returning to the editorial appearing in the Christian Science Monitor in June 1920, we see the following. "For it was the naked theory of Adam Weishaupt that no scruple was to be permitted to be taken at any evil which would make for the advantage of the order, since the order itself was superior to every other consideration. It was this theory, more than any other one thing, which brought about the recent World War." Was World War I a consequence of conspiratorial design? Certainly the author of this editorial believed so. Do conspirators foment wars in order to advance their designs? That's almost like asking if the sun will rise in the east tomorrow morning. Of course they do. Anything that will further the goals of the conspiracy is permitted and encouraged. As we shall point out in part 2 of this presentation, wars always mean more government and moral decline, 2 consequences that all would-be tyrants have always sought to bring about. Additional evidence of the continuity of conspiratorial design from Weishaupt to the present appeared in 1980 with the publication of James H. Billington's study entitled Fire in the Minds of Men. Billington, a well-connected scholar who taught at both Harvard and Princeton, eventually rose to become the Librarian of Congress. His book, subtitled Origins of the Revolutionary Faith, traces revolutionary activity from the 18th to the 20th century. Billington discussed the importance to conspiratorial continuity of Filippo Buonarroti, who left Italy for France in 1792, brought his knowledge of Illuminism to Switzerland, and eventually collaborated with Mazzini in forming Young Italy. Buonarroti's goal, according to Billington, was the creation by force of a new secular order. And his organizational plan, said Billington, was simply lifted from the Bavarian order of Illuminists. Billington also stated that it is from Bavarian Illuminism that the modern revolutionary tradition has arisen. Billington made note of the placement on our nation's great seal of occult symbols. He pointed to the contrast existing between the balanced complexity of the new American Federation and the occult simplicity of its great seal, an all-seeing eye atop a pyramid over the words Novus Ordo Seclorum. The reverse of our nation's great seal, which has been seen on the $1 bill since 1935, has been the symbol of occultists and revolutionaries for more than 200 years. It was incorporated into the Great Seal in 1782. Revolutionary thinking surely played a role in putting an occult mark on our nation only 6 years after it was born. Generally, the reverse of the seal had been little known, and because of its occult significance, was ill-regarded by those who did know of its existence. There is a small chapel in the U.S. Capitol, however, and its stained glass windows show both sides of the Great Seal. Then in 1935, Secretary of Agriculture Henry Wallace persuaded Secretary of the Treasury Henry Morgenthau to place the Great Seal on the back of the $1 bill. According to Arthur Schlesinger, Jr., Wallace informed Morgenthau that Novus Ordo Seclorum meant New Deal. Obviously, Morgenthau didn't know any Latin. Novus Ordo Seclorum translates literally to New Order of the Ages and freely to New World Order. But Schlesinger also stated that for many years, Morgenthau had to defend himself from charges that he was mixed up with the occult and the secret societies. In 1966, while giving his own historical survey of the conspiracy against civilization, Robert Welch, the founder of the John Birch Society, suggested that its roots ran from the Illuminati of 1776 through Karl Marx and the creation of the communist movement in the mid-19th century and on into our own times. In a 1966 essay entitled The Truth in Time, he wrote, "The extrinsic evidence is strong and convincing that by the beginning of the 20th century, there had evolved an inner core of conspiratorial power, able to direct and control subversive activities which were worldwide in their reach, incredibly cunning and ruthless in their nature, and brilliantly far-sighted and patient in their strategy. Whether or not this all-powerful hidden command was due to an unbroken continuation of Weishaupt's Illuminati, or was a distillation from the leadership of this and other groups, we do not know. And we still do not know for certain, though evidence surely suggests that the threat facing mankind today is indeed a continuation of Weishaupt's designs. What we do know without question is that a conspiracy exists. Its goal is and has been a new world order built on the very economic control and world government that the leaders of our own nation are creating right before our eyes. Its well-known creation, the United Nations, is intended to be the seat of the world government that has been sought for more than 200 years. To propel the world into wanting world government, its arm known as communism has been responsible for the murder of more than 100 million human beings in the 20th century. The designs of these diabolically driven plotters are certainly real and terribly threatening. Consider 300,000 innocent peasants, a sizable portion of the population of France at the time, fell victim to the French Revolution. Wars and revolutions throughout the 19th century, traceable to the conspiracy and its agents, resulted in the death of millions. According to this 1971 congressional report, the Soviets created a famine in the Ukraine that killed upwards of 7 million. They murdered, killed, and tortured tens of millions more in Eastern Europe and in Russia during the blood-drenched decades of their rule. Evidence is provided in this additional 1971 report showing that the Chinese communists had already murdered somewhere between 34 and 64 million of their own people. It's hard to comprehend such horror. In fact, it's easier to realize the horror involved in murdering only 34 or 64 persons. When the Vietnam War ended in the 1970s, Cambodia's communist leaders murdered nearly 20% of that small nation's 7 million people. During their invasion of Afghanistan in the 1980s, the Soviets caused the death of over 1 million people in that once peaceful land. Children were naturally attracted to the booby-trapped toys dropped from the air by Soviet planes. These exploded and blew away the limbs of the youth, blinded them, and left them disfigured for life. Why all the murder? Why all the horror? Don't they want colonies of slaves? Yes, they do. But it has long been a tactic of the conspiracy to control populations through the use of terror. This is why they murder, and why they murder indiscriminately. Terror keeps people in line. Terror not only helps to conquer, it is very effective at keeping a people conquered. It's easy for Americans to conclude that nothing similar to what we have described could happen today, and especially happen in our own land. But the most recent perpetrators of these horrible crimes are still in charge. And some of them, like Mikhail Gorbachev, are now treated as noble humanitarians. Far from being repudiated, our own leaders have embraced arch criminals in Russia, in China, here in the United States, and in various international forums where world government is praised. Crime unpunished, at least through the bare minimum of deserved ostracism, is crime rewarded. That our own leaders would sit across tables and participate in banquets and conferences with individuals known to have the blood of millions on their hands is testimony to their own willingness to submit to the conspiracy's dictates. More than 200 years ago, Adam Weishaupt gathered the worst evildoers of his day into his conspiratorial web. But he also recognized the need to influence the masses, to confuse them and disarm them. As Reverend Clarence Kelly pointed out in his 1974 book, Conspiracy Against God and Man, the Illuminati's goals included, we must win the common people in every corner. This will be obtained chiefly by means of the schools. We must acquire the direction of education, of church management, of the professorial chair, and of the pulpit. Though not their only targets, the schools and the churches were to be prime targets of the conspiracy. Both still are. In 1799, no one would have contemplated that many of America's churches would fall victim to conspiratorial design. Patrick Henry explicitly pointed to the destructiveness of good order that revolutionaries had inflicted on France. Because he did not want our nation to follow the same path, he pointed to France and remarked, "She destroys within herself the great pillars of government and all social life. I mean virtue, morality, and religion. This is the armor, and this alone is that which renders us invincible." George Washington, too, recognized the importance to a healthy nation of the churches and the schools, where virtue, morality, and religion would be taught. In his farewell address, he said, "And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on minds of peculiar structure, reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in the absence of religious principles." The message is that morality will suffer if there is no organized religion promoting it, and so the conspiracy decided to attack religion. In all of the conspiracy's endeavors, secrecy has always been essential. In his Proofs of a Conspiracy, Professor Robeson quoted many of the instructions given to rising members of the Illuminati. One of these stated, quote, "The great strength of our order lies in its concealment. Let it never appear in any place in its own name, but always covered by another name and another occupation," end quote. Conspiracy is always built on secrecy. Recognizing this, researcher James Lucier stated in 1968, "The first job of a conspiracy is to convince the world that conspiracy does not exist." Today, great energy is being spent by many to disparage the very notion of conspiracy and even to hold up for ridicule anyone who dares to suggest that deliberate plotting is at the root of our nation's problems. Yet the evidence to bring one to conclude that conspiracy does indeed exist is available. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Robert Welch frequently offered his belief that all that has ever been needed to break the back of any conspiracy is exposure. Shine the light of day on it and its perpetrators, he maintained, and the house of cards on which it is built will collapse. As we have sought to show ever so fleetingly, the forces of evil throughout history have always been organized, but the forces of good have not. As a consequence, good people have been left unprepared to defend themselves from manipulation and treachery. Certainly, it's about time for good people to organize, for good people to work in concert to oppose the steady drive of our nation and ourselves into slavery. This is the purpose of the John Birch Society. Our organization is something new in history. It must not fail for lack of willing hands and noble hearts. In part 2 of this presentation, we will focus on what the conspiracy is doing to America in our lifetime, in the schools, the churches, the government, and much more. But the question before us remains, which way, America? Will it be the Declaration of Independence and an era of less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, a better world? Or will it be the New World Order created by a criminal conspiracy bent on making slaves of the human race? The choice is not just mine to make, it is yours as well.